Now, having put another very strange year behind us, what's in the mining sector in 2022? Joining us now is a regular contributor that we've had here right the way throughout the pandemic from SP Angel. It's John Meyer, mining specialist. John, welcome. As we cap out this 2021 year, how would you describe what's been going on and what are things looking like as we look into 2022?
Well, it's been a very interesting year. We were in lockdown this time last year, pretty much. Certainly heading into it, and life was tough, but there was stimulus going on, so the mining sector was looking quite buoyant at the time, and has continued to remain buoyant. Commodity prices rose this time in 2020. And they've held those high levels. We bounced a little bit off the top. The Chinese government took action to try and reduce commodity prices. They were very successful with iron ore, not immediately, but iron ore prices more than halved at one stage. I see they're climbing their way back up again because they're having to re-stimulate the Chinese economy with construction following the Evergrande crisis and the problems that's causing for their local construction or local building industries. Of course, there's some inflation now coming through, very high inflation levels in the US and in many other places around the world in September, October, and November. Slightly worrying to some degree, but I think still quite a lot of temporary inflation. Remember, so much of that inflation was caused by the rise in oil prices, which more than doubled, as many other commodities have done, and by logistical issues causing shortages of products in various industries around the world. Thankfully, I hear that building products in the UK are not looking so scarce right now.
Yeah, just much of what you've said, of course, we're taking through with us into 2022, but the deep underlying fact is that we are still under this big coronavirus unknown. Yes, we've got a new strain. We don't know how many new strains are going to encounter in the new year. You and I, before a previous interview, were talking about this, and we were hoping perhaps maybe this is the beginning of the idea of becoming something new, in as much as it's now just going to be nothing much more, hopefully, than just a really bad cold that we're going to have to get through every time it comes through to us. So let's hope that the markets start to open up. How do you think the mining sector is going to deal with all this? I mean, let's assume that this big underlying, as I said, unknown continues. How do you think the markets are going to react? Because we've seen the stimulus, as you've mentioned, support the markets so far. Whether or not that's going to continue, is the mining sector a little bit nervous about the outlook?
I'm only nervous from a supply chain perspective. Omicron is with us, and that's going to cause some pretty serious short-term issues, in my view. But actually, what this means is the Bank of England, the US Federal Reserve are likely to keep stimulus on for a while. I think they're not likely to raise interest rates again for quite some time, not until Omicron and perhaps whatever the next variant is subsides. It's quite possible that Omicron might be the last or become the dominant variant. It seems to be displacing Delta and other variants and taking over very fast. So what this means is more stimulus for longer. Sadly, the first death in the UK from Omicron was reported this morning by Boris Johnson. The authorities are extremely concerned about the speed that this is going around. I think, unfortunately, it is a bit worse than the common cold, but eventually, when the nation has had sufficient exposure to this, then yes, I think that's the way it's going to go. And this isn't just my view. This is the view of our in-house healthcare expert, Vadim Alexandra at SP Angel.
At the same time, of course, we've got some really buoyant parts of the sector. Electric vehicles, of course, is something we've been on at as a big theme that we've been seeing over the last couple of years or so. And of course, I guess that's going to do nothing but pick up into the new year. What should we be watching for in the EV scene that as mining people with an interest in the mining sector, which could excite us in 2022?
Well, there's going to be an acceleration, in my view, in sales. People love EVs. They love the fact that they're cheap to run. They should, in theory, be cheap to maintain as well. Less moving parts, so to speak. But it depends a little bit on economic activity. I think the governments will provide sufficient stimulus, and there's certainly a lot of people are being driven into this market by emissions regulations in cities like London and other major cities around the world that are desperately looking to improve air quality. And if you think, well, Omicron and other coronaviruses affect the lungs, then improving air quality is an increasingly important issue for policymakers.
And of course, this leads us in nicely into the energy sector, which has a big overlap, of course, with electric vehicles, batteries, and storage of power and so forth. And as we've seen recently, you reported a couple of weeks ago, China increasing its renewables, its wind business. And I think this is presumably going to be something else as well, isn't it? Into 2022, we can expect more of this. What are your thoughts on renewables and power generation and where we're going to get all that from? And of course, again, revisiting this idea of the sort of metals that we should be looking at in regard to this sort of acceleration of uptake.
Well, China, as with many things, has really gone forwards fast on wind power. So they're up to 300 gigawatt hours of wind farm capacity. The US, the UK, and Europe are looking to catch up with that. Joe Biden's pushing through his $2 trillion plan for infrastructure spending. And it's not just going to be wind farms, which are major consumers when it comes to steel, copper, manganese, rare earths, all sorts of commodities that are going to be needed for these things, but also huge solar farms. They use a lot of silver in their connections, not to mention the silica for the glass, and the upgrading of national grids and battery storage to help smooth out the power fluctuations that come off of solar and wind. So it'll be lithium battery packs to support solar power projects, because if a cloud goes over a solar farm, then you need the backup there very quickly. And maybe vanadium redox batteries for longer term grid storage to give that sort of 4 to 6 to 8 hour energy supply back into the marketplace.
What do you see as the big innovations that we're still to see in this sector? Because clearly, as you mentioned, battery storage is key in finding an easier and quicker way of doing all that, and maybe a smaller way of doing it as well. And I touch on the small thing because I also looking myself at the electric vehicle market, and I'm actually astounded as to how big these batteries still are in vehicles and how long it takes to feed energy into these. And indeed, when you actually get a full tank, I call it a battery or whatever, full of charge, you can still only go 300 miles. Now, for me, that still does not answer the question about how I'm going to get from A to B on a long journey, how I'm going to be able to fill up quickly, how I'm going to be able to pay for all this, and indeed fix the problem I got at home here and not being able to directly link up to the grid to get my charge through to the car. So there's still here a lot of issues, I think, that consumers are still chewing over and waiting, I guess, until these are all answered.
Well, there are going to be huge issues on domestic power supplies, because yes, you can slow charge a car off from this power supply into your house, but I'm not so sure about fast charging on a regular basis, particularly if you're running other heavy equipment. So, for example, if you're running an air source heat pump and you're in the middle of winter and also trying to fast charge your car, will there be enough power capacity on a single phase power line into a domestic application? So I think that, and then if you consider suburban streets or even inner city streets where lots of people are suddenly trying to charge up their vehicles, then it's going to become a very big issue. And I think we are going to see the upgrading of power cables in our cities and across the land, and this is going to use a lot of copper, probably more aluminium as well, and all sorts of other things. For that, you already have to have a randomizer with a car charger anyway. So when you plug in your charger and leave it plugged in, what that does, it means that everybody's cars don't suddenly switch on at the same time from a charging perspective.
One final thing is interesting going into the back end of the year. I've seen some news headlines recently about Glencore. Glencore has a number of different projects and assets under its belt. One of those is coal. And there's been some movement from activist investors suggesting that Glencore would be better without its coal division because it represents the old technology of trying to find energy sources, and they're trying to steer away from this. I guess part of it is the social lobby, which is pushing hard to try and get these what they perceive as dirty mining companies to try and clean up their act, to try and go into renewables rather than some of the old technologies like coal. Do you see more of this happening next year? Do you think that big mining companies are going to get pushed around a little bit more by the social media lobby, if you like, to try and persuade them to clean up their act? I'm thinking not just necessarily about projects, but also things like the way they're getting stuff out of the ground, because the environmental footprint leaves a lot to be desired, I think, in terms of some of the methods that are still used in trying to extract some minerals.
Well, this is another new mega trend within our industry. And yes, the environmental, social governance, ESG side of things has gained a new momentum, particularly following the climate change conference in Glasgow. So if you go and see a major pension fund these days, their ESG officers will almost certainly be in the meeting. And they are, first of all, they start on the governance side of things. And we know that works. We know that ensuring that investing in companies that are good at their corporate governance generally means that you're investing in companies that will perform better. We know from visiting companies around the world that companies that are better at their environmental and social interactions, particularly with local communities, also perform better, and in fact suffer far less when things start to go wrong, particularly in a local scenario. So terribly important. It's a bit like dealing with your neighbors back home. If your neighbors are happy, then then you should be happy too. So this is really gathering momentum, and yes, we are seeing the ESG agenda coming into just about everything that we're doing, and I'm very pleased to see it, because I think it's something that is important to quantify. Many mining companies are good at ESG, but not very good at quantifying exactly what they're doing and how well it works. And now there are companies coming along that are able to audit and really specify what's going on here, and that will enable ESG funds to now invest in these companies. So with your pension fund money, if you're asked to tick a series of boxes about how much risk you want, or what sort of, if you want to invest in ESG compliant companies, then I think this is going to direct a lot more money into companies that are good at this sort of thing and good at quantifying it. And then it's going a stage further than that. They're also looking at directing funds into companies that improve their carbon footprints. So if you've got a company like Glencore that has a huge carbon footprint through its coal business, and remember, Glencore was founded on its coal business in many respects, then if they're able to reduce that carbon footprint, then more ESG funding should come into that company and improve its rating. So companies like Glencore have enormous opportunity to, in fact, make huge strides at improving or reducing the quantities of carbon that they emit and produce, and therefore enormous opportunity to improve their ratings and their valuations as a result of making and quantifying those changes.
Interesting subject. John, thanks so much indeed. Have a great holiday season with you and your family, and we look forward to speaking to you, hopefully in the studio sometime in the new year.
Thank you, Jeremy.
That's John Meyer from SP Angel. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGCom, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.